Hello, good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are dialing in from. My name is Scott Sinclair. I am the Senior Manager of Programs here at Cancer and Careers, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Now, for those who are dialing in from your phone, if you could please let us know by sending an email to cancerandcareers@cew.org with your name and the phone number that you're dialing in from. That way we can confirm your attendance and make sure you get all of the relevant follow-up information after today's webinar. Now, for those of you who are new to Cancer and Careers, first of all, welcome. We are glad to have you. We were founded in 2001 to support every person in every industry and every job so they can thrive in their work and their life after a diagnosis. Cancer and Careers also works with companies to develop their internal systems of support for employees navigating illness at work. This list has this is a list of all of our free programs and services that we offer for people with cancer, as well as their caregivers, healthcare providers, coworkers. These include a comprehensive website and library of publications, which are available in both English and Spanish, as well as career coaching, resume review, financial and technology grants, access to experts for one-on-one support and educational events. And I will be back at the end of today's event to tell you a little bit about what we have coming up. There we go. Okay. So some quick housekeeping before we get started. If you are experiencing technical difficulties during today's webinar, please refer to our Zoom user guide, which is linked on this slide and is being shared in the chat right now as well. You can also reach out to Zoom support using the contact information on this slide. Also, please note that today's presentation is copyrighted, therefore the use of AI assistants and/or transcribing or recording devices of any kind by attendees is not allowed. Those who are found to be using AI or other recording or transcription software during CAC programming will be removed from the event. You'll be permitted to return without the AI or recording transcription software. You might also note that real-time closed captioning is available for today's event for those who need it, and a captioned recording of this webinar will be available on our website following the session. To request any additional reasonable accommodations, please send us an email to cancerandcareers@cew.org at least 24 hours before the next session. Now, for those of you who are seeking continuing education credits, this slide has a list of all of the organizations who have accredited today's webinar, as well as the required steps for getting a certificate. This information is also available on our website. Please note you are required to complete both the evaluation and pass the post-test to be eligible for CEs or PDCs. More information on how to access those will be shared throughout the webinar, and you'll be if you are unable to complete those today, we'll also send you an email tomorrow, no later than 5 p.m. Eastern, with all of the links that you need. Also, for those of you who are planning to request continuing education credits, our accrediting bodies require us to share this slide and let you know that there are no conflicts of interest to report. And for everyone here, we love hearing from you, both during the live webinar and after. So as you might know, Zoom has a lot of great features that you can use to interact with the event or today's speakers. You'll notice a chat box in the features panel. You can feel free to use that to communicate with our speakers, staff, other attendees. However, please note that the chat box is not private and it will show your first and last name. So that's something to be mindful of if or when you decide to use it. Also, if there are any questions about today's content, please drop them in the Q&A box also on that features panel, either at the top or the bottom of your screen. If you want to submit your questions anonymously, there is an option to do so. And we just request that you drop your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. There's a chance that we'll miss it in the chat box. If we don't get your question today, we're so sorry, but please, again, shoot us an email, cancerandcareers@cew.org, and we'll make sure that we get you an answer as soon as we can. Now, additionally, your feedback on our program evaluations mean the world to us. All of us at CAC are dedicated to creating the best programs possible. And it's from hearing from you, your insights, your observations, what worked, what didn't work, that we learn how to make this the best that it can be. So not only do your voices make a big difference in helping others and helping us shape these programs, sharing your experience also helps us with our funders, always anonymously, but it helps us illustrate the true impact of their support and allows us to continue offering these webinars free of charge. You can access the evaluation for today's webinar using this QR code on the screen or via link that is being shared in the chat box now. Don't worry, there'll be other times we share it too by the end of today's event. So thank you so much in advance for taking the time to share those thoughts with us. Now, thanks in part to Genentech, P&G Beauty, and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Cancer and Careers is proud to offer our 11th year of the Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series, which was created to provide anyone whose life has been touched by cancer with concise, targeted information about work-related issues as they arise after a diagnosis. Furthermore, we'd like to recognize Cancer and Careers' year-round sponsors who support all of our core programs and allow us to continue providing our resources and services free of charge. Now, for today's session, Balancing Work and Cancer, we're going to explore issues that sit at the very heart of the conversation about employment after a diagnosis. So what information does one need to make good decisions around work? What considerations are there when deciding whether or not to disclose at an existing job or during a job search? How to manage one's side effects while working or address comments from coworkers. Over the next not hours, we're not keeping you here that long, don't worry. Over the next hour, we will discuss all of these questions and more. And leading today's webinar is Sissy Silva, Cancer and Careers' Senior Manager of Programs and Spanish Resources. Following Sissy's presentation, there will be time for Q&A again, so please drop those questions in the Q&A box. Maite and I will be monitoring the chat box while Sissy's presenting, but if there are any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. But without further ado, I am thrilled to hand it over to Sissy Silva.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Maite, in the background. As we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that everyone joining us today is in a different place when it comes to their cancer experience. Some of you may have just received a cancer diagnosis, so are just at the beginning stages of the process, and some of you may have already made decisions about working cancer, so are experts in your own right. And others of you may be caregivers or healthcare professionals here on the behalf of the people that you support. Today, I'm going to cover a wide range of topics and situations related to work after a cancer diagnosis, and not all of them may be relevant to you right now, but my hope is that you will be able to walk away with information that may be helpful either today or soon again. So from here, I want to jump right into the heart of the work and cancer conversation, and that's the diagnosis and work dilemma. When you're thinking about whether or not to work during treatment or shortly after, it can help to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What are the moving pieces? Your specific diagnosis, your job, your personal needs, they all factor in. All of the unknowns can feel, understandably, overwhelming. And this makes it important in moments like this to acknowledge the reality of what's going on. And then from there, start to isolate and answer some of the specific questions in order to illuminate the best path forward. Now, it's also important to recognize that sometimes the answers to those questions are naturally going to be in conflict with each other. So the key is recognizing those tensions and making the best possible decisions with everything in mind. Two key questions that can help make sense of everything are: how important is work to you personally? And what information do you actually need to make good decisions about work? Even if you've already made some choices already about work, it can still be helpful to come back to these questions because they're a good gut check to see if what you're doing is working for you, or if you need to revisit things as treatment or recovery moves forward. Once you've asked yourself those two questions, there are often a number of questions that naturally start to arise. And it's not uncommon to find that those questions aren't necessarily in alignment with each other either. And that's okay. So it can be a good idea to take a step back again and start evaluating the individual parts within the bigger picture to figure out what's true for you. For example, what are your financial and insurance needs? For some people, those are going to be the key decisions in driving your other decisions about whether or not you're going to work during treatment. But for others, that might not be the case. Also ask yourself, how is your identity connected to your job? Maybe you're someone that loves what you do and you want to continue doing it because it's going to help you cope during treatment. Of course, this isn't going to be the case for everyone, so the point is to have a sense of how identity and work intersect for you. And of course, no one person is only their job and their diagnosis. So, what might you want to consider in terms of your personal life? Do you have obligations to family or other loved ones that need to be prioritized? What do you think you might need in terms of managing stress? You may also find that you're going to you start asking yourself even more questions and even more come up that you don't know how to answer by yourself. And that's again totally okay. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. Gathering information is an important step in the process that can help you in that active decision making. And to simplify this process, we've broken it down into three categories that you see laid out here. The first being medical and treatment information. Next is work information, and finally, legal information. Before we go any further, I do want to make it clear to everyone that I am not a lawyer. So, if you're interested in learning more about which federal or state laws and protections may apply to you, I do encourage you to reach out to a legal expert. But for the purposes of today's discussion, I do want to discuss one key law in order to help provide a foundation for any additional fact finding that may be necessary. This law is the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. To start, the ADA is a federal law, meaning that it applies to all 50 states and territories. The part that is relevant to the work in cancer piece comes from Title I, and like all laws, it has certain requirements that must be met in order to be able to use the law. In broad strokes, they are the employer must have a minimum of 15 employees for the law to apply to them. You, the person with the job, must have the necessary skills, certifications, etc., to be able to do the job, and their disability must meet the criteria determined by the ADA. If all of these requirements are met, the ADA may provide protection from discrimination and may also provide access to reasonable accommodations, which we will also discuss later on in the presentation. Again, I am not an attorney, so this is just a quick overview so that you know that the ADA is something that you might be able to consider. And more information can be found by reaching out to a legal expert to ask specific questions about your certain circumstances or by using the links at the bottom of this slide. It is also critically important to spend some time thinking about the kinds of decisions that you're going to make related to disclosures so that you're able to make choices about sharing your story that work best for you. That means making clear decisions on what you want to share and where. In your personal life, you might be completely open and with certain people, but then in your work life, you might be a little more private, and that's perfectly okay. There's also a third area to think about, and that is the online space, which brings its own sets of complexities and considerations that you need to make. At Cancer and Careers, we often hear from patients and survivors about the role that the internet plays in helping them through their cancer experience. For many, it creates a sense of community and a way to feel better in the moment. But it also creates a written record of information that can be quite difficult to get rid of. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not saying never post anything online, since it can actually be a good thing to have an online presence, but rather that it's important for everyone to have a solid understanding of what the virtual space is in order to make informed decisions and feel more in control of the story that's being presented about them. And in part, this is because research indicates that more and more hiring managers, as well as existing employers, are Googling prospective candidates and current employees, respectively. Now, this is not necessarily because they want to find something negative about the person. Rather, for hiring managers, it's often done to confirm things that they already like about a particular candidate. And current managers may just want to learn a little bit more about their team and they're a little curious about the person. Still, it's possible that they'll come across a post on Facebook or Instagram containing information that maybe that person would have preferred the employer didn't know about. Now, at this point, some of you may probably be saying to yourselves, but wait, don't my privacy settings protect me? Which is a great question. Understanding the privacy policies of the website that you're using is really important as they're constantly changing. Because Facebook and sites like it are designed to sell us things in order to be able to make new deals with advertisers, they're constantly changing their privacy policies and often without notice. On the plus side, that's one of the reasons why these platforms are free of charge for us. But it does make it harder, much harder to keep up with those changes. And it's something that's like it's very time consuming as well. So it's very impractical. So in those online spaces where we've connected with people and they've connected with you and have privacy settings, it doesn't mean that it's perfectly secure or it's a structured system. As an alternative, sites like My Lifeline or Caring Bridge exist, and which are both social networking sites that are specifically designed to be a safe place to share updates about your cancer experience. They both have a more controlled environment and have a higher level of privacy than other mainstream social media networks. But while their privacy settings are easier to follow, it's still important to recognize that profiles are not 100% automatically protected. So if you're going to use those sites, it's worth taking the time to read through the privacy policies, figure out what protections are offered by each level of security, figure out which one is going to work best for you. In general, it's always a good idea to review the privacy policies of any website that you're going to be sharing personal information in. Another step you can take when it comes to protecting your online privacy is creating a personal disclosure plan. That means getting really clear on what, if anything, you want to share about your cancer experience, both online and offline. And if you do decide to share, think about where that information is going to live. On a personal blog, social media, support forum, etc. And if you're thinking through as you're thinking through all of this and what's going to work best for you, it's a good idea to spend some time considering the potential long-term impacts of online disclosure. It may be the case that some of you have already disclosed at work and everyone is really supportive, which is an amazing situation to be in. But the fact is that the internet doesn't go away. So it's important to think beyond right now and consider the possible long-term impacts of what you post. Because absolutely none of us can predict the future. So you may find yourself unexpectedly looking for a job 5 years from now, or maybe your supportive supervisor that you have right now may move on and be replaced by someone that starts Googling their stuff. There's no way of knowing how that new person is going to respond to the information they find. Then, once you have made those types of decisions, communicate them with the people in your network, whether they're your friends and family or people that you've connected with online. And even if even after you have shared your preferences with your loved ones, it's still a good idea to monitor what others are posting so that you have a sense of what's out there about you. There are also plenty opportunities to take control of what comes up about you in searches by taking a strategic approach to what you post online. People don't know what you don't share with them, and in a work context, social media is a forum where you not only tell, but also show people who you are as a professional. Some tips are Google yourself. You'll want to know what comes up about you on a Google search. That way you can stay ahead of the ball and be able to respond to anything that may come up. Use popular social media websites strategically. Keep it professional and polite. Create a professional website or blog. Now, this is a great way to control your own narrative by putting out information that you will want to be easily found in a Google search. Delete old posts. They're still going to be out there somewhere, but they'll be a little harder to find. And last but not least, think strategically about what it is exactly that you're posting. We recommend running each post through a filter like, would I want my boss, future or current, or coworkers to know about this? Would I want this on the front page of my favorite magazine or news website? Would I want my grandmother or mother to see this? Now, as we continue talking about making disclosure decisions, it's important to think about them as part of a spectrum, meaning it's not a black or white issue and there are no absolutes. Start by asking yourself how it is that you feel about sharing the news. Some people may be comfortable with the idea and others not so much, and both decisions are valid. Also, ask yourself why it is that you want to share. Is it because you feel like it's important for you to do so? Or is it necessary in order to access certain legal protections or benefits? There is no right answer. It's it's really all about what your specific needs, preferences, and circumstances are. And of course, not sharing is often also an option, and we'll talk a little more about that later. However, if you are planning conversations, stick with what you know is true today. Try to avoid bringing what ifs into the dialogue in order to keep the conversations more focused and productive. Also, sharing typically doesn't have to be an all or nothing scenario. You can always start by sharing a little bit of information or a small piece of information that's relevant right now, and then share a little more down the road if or when that becomes more relevant. But remember that once information is out there, you really cannot unshare it. Now, also, where you are in terms of your current work circumstances may play a role in your decision making in terms of what, when, and how you choose to disclose. For example, someone who's been at their job for 10 years and is very close to their supervisor or coworkers may make a different set of disclosure decisions than, say, someone that just started working or is currently looking for work. All of this is to say that different people may have different concerns about disclosure depending on who they are and what their circumstances are. Now, when we introduce the idea of not disclosing in the workplace, it is very understandable that people are often confused about whether or not it's their responsibility to disclose and discuss their diagnosis and or treatment plan at work. So if you are wondering whether or not you have to share the news of your diagnosis at work, you should know that although there can be exceptions, in most instances, there is no requirement or obligation to share details about your health or your health history with an employer, nor can they ask. Again, in most instances. However, people may decide to disclose for a variety of reasons. Are there any legal benefits to disclosing? For example, you might have to share some information if you want to access a protection that you're eligible for under the law, such as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. Are there interpersonal reasons? For example, some people are sharers, so they might feel like it's unnatural not to say anything, and others have zero interest in sharing and feel very strongly that medical and health information should remain private. Now, in these circumstances, there is no right or wrong. It's about what feels comfortable for you. Are there any practical reasons to consider? For example, someone who has been working hard to improve their performance after they may have received a bad review, may want to share what's going on with their supervisor if they're concerned that they may not be able to keep up the pace um, due to treatment-related fatigue or other side effects that they're experiencing. Now, in that case, sharing what's going on with your supervisor might help provide some context if your performance starts to dip. Now, with all of this in mind, remember, disclosure is a spectrum. In none of these three examples do you necessarily have to share every last detail about your diagnosis or prognosis. For example, someone that's seeking a legal protection, such as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA, as I mentioned before, might have to provide some information for why they're eligible to ask for it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to lay out every minute detail out on the table. And if there's, again, a need to divulge more information down the road, you can be prepared to do so, but there's no need to offer it all right away. Another part of the disclosure decision, including figuring out how much to share and with whom, can involve considering what you know about the possible side effects that you're likely to experience, particularly if the choice has been made not to disclose either at all or widely within the organization. Some additional considerations about whether or not to disclose at work include the individual work culture of the workplace. Thinking about the various ways that people communicate with each other at work may help you decide if, how, and how much you want to share in that specific workplace. When contemplating who to tell, now that's going to vary on you and your specific circumstances. It's also possible that you may find yourself having multiple conversations around disclosures. So if that's the case, we recommend starting with the person that's easiest to talk to. For many people, that's their direct supervisor because that's someone with whom they already have ongoing conversations with and may be an advocate for them with the higher ups. But it's also important when considering your supervisor to bear in mind that most managers aren't trained to be managers. So this could potentially be the first time that they're having this type of conversation, and they may feel that they're in uncharted territories themselves. And unfortunately, this often puts the burden on the employee with cancer to help teach that manager on what to do next. Because we've been hearing this a lot at Cancer and Careers, we created a manager's toolkit because survivors asked us for something that they could have that's concrete that they could take with them into these types of conversations with their supervisors that would allow them to outline what would be helpful for them and how they can feel more supported by their manager. Now, for other people, their supervisor or manager is just out of the question. So they might want to go to HR instead. HR departments can be a fountain of information because they're the ones who understand the employee handbook the best. And they may also have experience with other employees that have had similar circumstances. In whoever it is that you choose to speak to, the most important thing to disclose in any of these conversations is the idea that treatment's going to be fluid. So whomever you're talking to, help them understand that the things that you're sharing are what you know today, but may not apply next week or next month or 6 months from now. And this is likely going to be an ongoing conversation. This can help your employer understand that you intend to communicate with the absolute most updated information that you have. It's also important to also consider that your body may disclose for you. Side effects like hair loss, weight changes, or skin issues can be visible. Others, like fatigue or cognitive changes, are a little less obvious, but they can still affect how you show up at work. So, if you're planning not to disclose widely, it's helpful to think about how these changes might be noticed by coworkers and whether they could invite questions that you want to be prepared for. Um, and from there, it's all about knowing how to be prepared with responses to any questions that they may have so that you don't accidentally share any information that you may have preferred to have kept private. Now, this slide has some points to consider for those of you that are working remotely who wish to avoid any accidental disclosure. It's very easy to develop a false sense of security when it comes to working from home, but in some ways, you may need to be a little more hyper aware in those situations. For example, if you work from home and have video meetings, your coworkers, clients, and whomever it is that you're meeting with will be able to view your personal space. So, make sure that there's nothing visible in the background that you're not comfortable with sharing. Or choose to use a virtual black background like the one that I'm using or a blurred background. Also, if you're sharing your screen during meetings, be aware of any desktop files, pop-up notifications, etc. that might be visible while you're doing the sharing. It can be a good idea to pause those right before the meeting. If you are checking your personal email or logging into any personal accounts on a work device, we also recommend to sign out at the end of every single day and then also set up a two-factor authentication to ensure that you're notified if anyone else is trying to sign on to it. That's not you. As I mentioned earlier, disclosure is an important aspect to consider when it comes to the job search. A lot of people ask us if they should include a cancer experience in their resume or cover letter, either as a positive or as an explanation of some sort. Our first response is always do whatever you're comfortable with. But think about this. The goal of a cover letter and resume are to get you an interview based on your skills and potential. So in that case, your diagnosis and treatment aren't really part of that conversation. Another important thing to consider is the fact that disclosing your diagnosis on a cover letter won't be a dynamic exchange. And by that, I mean that you won't be able to physically be there when the employer initially absorbs that information. So you won't have the opportunity to explain anything or answer any questions that may come up or steer them back to the questions about your skills. The bottom line is no one tells everything about everything during a job interview or even once they're hired. However, if you are 100% sure that you want to disclose during the hiring process, the cover letter and resume are still not the best places to do that. If you do feel that it's important to let your employer know about your health history before you accept a job, and we've certainly met a number of people for whom that was very important for, we typically recommend that you still wait until a little later in the hiring process to do so. This way, everyone involved in hiring has the chance to spend time with you and get a sense of who you are as a person and as an employee, instead of just reading that information on your cover letter and potentially putting it immediately into a no pile. And of course, always remembering that you are never required to share that information. With that said, it's common for those with a diagnosis to get caught up in the disclosure piece when it comes to voluntary questions on applications. Many organizations are asking these questions to get a better sense of candidates as they work to expand the diversity on their staff. These questions are supposed to be optional, and for the most part, they are. This means that it's entirely up to you how and if you want to answer these demographic questions. If you decide that you don't want to share this information, which again is well within your right to choose, it's often a good idea to select the prefer not to answer option for all of the demographic questions so that it doesn't seem like a red flag that you're only doing that for the disability question. Now, I'd like to jump over to discuss side effects. The most common one that we hear about is chemo brain or brain fog. This type of fog can come on whether or not you've received chemotherapy. While there's no magic bullet solution, One piece of advice is to let go of the idea of multitasking because studies show that only 2% of people multitask effectively, and I am not one of them. So, to combat this, we recommend going back to basics. Write down a list of your priorities and then turn off any notifications, whether they're for your phone notifications or email notifications, so you're not distracted. And focus on one thing at a time. Also, writing everything down is a good practice. So you're able to create a record of something and not necessarily having to rely on your memory as much. Additionally, it's a good idea to take the time to rehearse everything from presentations, project updates, and even phone calls. If you work in an office type environment that has a shared calendar, you may also want to schedule some time or block some time off in that calendar so that people know that you're busy and they won't distract you. Also, simple stress relief practices can go a long way to helping you improve focus. Deep breathing exercises or even 2 to 3 minutes of meditation can be easily done from your desk or while taking a short walk. Just a little bit can go a long way in terms of helping you hit that reset button. So, important to consider all of these. It is also helpful to take some time to think about how it is that you're going to communicate with supervisors and coworkers around their changing needs. As for priorities, create a written plan. Know your limits and set boundaries. It's important to remember that the way that we communicate at work is going to be very different from the way that we communicate at home. So, despite being exhausted, it's still important to communicate in a professional manner at work. What can help with this is using what we call professional no's. That sounds something like if your employer gives you a new project that you know you won't be able to complete, you can say something like, I appreciate that you thought of me for this project, but I'm a little bit swamped this week and I'm concerned of my ability to get back to you in a timely manner. Or you may be offered extra hours, but your energy levels are just way too low, and you can answer by saying something like, thank you for offering me the additional shifts. Unfortunately, I'm short on time at the moment as I've got some family obligations to attend to. But I would love to talk about this possibility again in a few months once the situation at home has settled down. Practice this or something like this so you can identify language that feels comfortable for you in the event that you're put on the spot where you might need to set some clear boundaries. You can hear a little bit more about this in our upcoming two-part Communicating Effectively webinar starting next month on September 10th and October 8th. If you are not registered already, you can do so on our website, and I believe the link is at the end of these slides, which were emailed to you this morning. Now, while we're thinking about how to respond during specific conversations that might happen in the workplace, I want to tell you about another conversation technique that we call the swivel. Similar to professional no's, it's a verbal formula or pattern, but for this one specifically, this is used in response to cancer-related comments that might be made by a, say, well-intended colleague. It involves acknowledging the cancer-related comment, putting an and right in the middle, and then swiveling the conversation around to a topic that's more work-oriented. So, for example, if someone comes up to you and says, my uncle had cancer, you could respond by swiveling and saying, I'm so sorry to hear that. It must have been hard. And what did you think about the meeting that we had yesterday? Being able to shift the conversation back to a place where you feel comfortable can be really empowering and also indicates to that coworker that you're still that whole vibrant person with lots of contributions to make. Now, let's talk about managing side effects at work. One tool to use is reasonable accommodations, which I mentioned earlier is one benefit under the ADA for those that qualify. Basically, they are tools that can be used to make working through treatment or returning to work after treatment a little more manageable. Now, before we move on, just a note, there is a whole lot of information available on what reasonable accommodations are and how to use them and how they can be really valuable when thinking through issues in real time. For this information, you can check out our website. And also another helpful place to look is askjan.org, which is the homepage of the Job Accommodations Network. And of course, it is always a good idea to ask a legal expert for any guidance with questions about your specific circumstances. Now, one type of accommodation that might be made is in the workspace, meaning the actual environmental challenges that exist at work. And I'm going to walk through some examples about how to use reasonable accommodations in this context in the next couple of slides. Our first example is a woman we met at CAC a few years back. She was a social worker and truly loved her job, and work was a huge part of how she was coping with treatment. However, one of the side effects that she had, nausea, was worse while she was at work. One of the things that Sue noted was that while she was experiencing nausea both at home, at night, and on the weekends during the same work hours, the nausea was still more prevalent at work. So we went back and forth with asking her questions and eventually discovered that her office was located right outside of the cafeteria, which meant that the smell of the cooking food kept wafting in to her office, and that's what was exacerbating her nausea. So for her, the reasonable accommodation was to switch offices to be away from the cafeteria. A pretty small change for her workplace and one that had no cost to them at all. And while, of course, this didn't completely eliminate her nausea, Sue was still able, it did mean that she was able to manage that side effect a little better. It meant that work where she wanted to feel normal and contribute was no longer extra hard because it was making her side effects worse. Our next example is a gentleman named Frank, who was struggling with fatigue as a result of his treatment. He worked on the finance and operations team at his company, and his job required him to print and scan a lot of documents throughout the day, which meant that in order to do so, he had to walk down 2 flights of stairs to get to the room that had all the equipment in it. But as his treatment progressed, his fatigue got worse, and eventually it meant that going up and down the stairs every single day was nearly impossible. So for him, the reasonable accommodation was to get a combination printer scanner that would live next to his desk, which allowed him to preserve his energy at work. Now, when we compare these two examples, we can see that there's no one size fits all when it comes to reasonable accommodations. It's about looking at the specific job, the specific side effect, and the specific challenge to identify solutions that are creative and logical. There are also a number of questions that you can ask yourself to identify other potential accommodations. For example, can you work full-time but maybe a flexible schedule? This would mean that you ultimately work the same amount of hours, but they could be distributed a little differently. Maybe instead of the 9 to 5, you might ask to work 7 to 3 so that you're able to maximize the hours that you're feeling best in. Or you can, if you need to take time during the workday to go to an appointment, maybe you can make that time up by working later that day or later on in the week. If your job includes allocated break times, is it possible for you to take more frequent or additional breaks? Let's say your schedule entitles you to 2 breaks and a 45-minute lunch. But what you really need is 4 breaks during the day. Those extra breaks could potentially be considered an accommodation. Again, these examples are meant to help you to start thinking about accommodations and also to remove some of the myths around the concept, such as accommodations are expensive or unlikely to be approved. The fact is that according to the Job Accommodations Network, most accommodations cost nothing at all or cost an employer $300 or less. Be resourceful and really think about your environment and what it is that might be causing the specific challenges that you're experiencing. And remember that it's all fluid. What might work for you today may be different tomorrow, and it's not going to be a one-time only opportunity. Now, what if it's time for a new job? Not everyone will continue to do the same job that they held prior to their diagnosis. Sometimes people experience a physical change during treatment that might make it impossible to do the same job that they had before. Sometimes people might have a change of heart and decide that they want to spend time doing something different or follow a dream that they once had. Or some people just want to shake things up and try something new. Regardless of the reason, it's very common for someone to be looking for work during or after treatment. Thinking about the job search itself, it's no secret that there are many challenges and unknowns involved. It can feel very scary, and particularly during this challenging time, it can seem impossible to do. But one of the most helpful things to remember is that job searching is a process and it takes time. And even if it doesn't feel like it right now, try to think about what it is that you want in a job, not what you need. And from there, you can start to build a a strategy that works for you. The job hunt also comes with huge ups and downs that need to be managed, and social workers can be incredibly helpful in figuring out how to manage the emotional roller coaster effectively. We've also noticed over the years that people in the cancer community tend to hold themselves to a higher standard than others who are looking for work. Like I said earlier, often survivors feel obligated to share more about their health history than they have to or they should. We like to say, job search is like building any relationship. It's all about the timing with various steps involved, and the process builds upon itself and can be heavily focused on a great first impression. And in this case, it's your resume, cover letter, LinkedIn profile, etc. If we are using dating as an example of relationship building, the first text conversation with a potential date is going to look a little differently and going to feel a little different than, say, a marriage proposal. So, if someone shows up on the first date and is in complete open book, sharing all of their idiosyncrasies and quirks immediately, that's going to read a little differently than if that same information comes up 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years from now. In the same way, you're not going to go into your first job interview and admit that you chew gum really loudly or that you always sign into Zoom meetings a couple of minutes late. So, I encourage you to keep in mind that it's important to behave appropriately in the context of which stage you're at in the job search process and also project appropriate confidence and can be a great way to do this. Finally, during this time where so much can feel and is out of control, there are elements of the job search that you can focus on right now that are completely within your control. Things like working on your resume, perfecting a cover letter, or getting into the habit of networking. Oh, networking. Networking is one of the earliest parts of the job search process. According to one of our career coaches, currently more than 85% of jobs are found through other people versus through job boards, headhunters, or ads. I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of networking because it feels like they're asking for a favor, which can feel especially challenging if you've been out of the game for a while due to treatment and recovery. But the fact is that basically anyone you know can be a source for networking. There are also great online resources for this, such as LinkedIn. LinkedIn has become the go-to source for employers looking to hire. And according to a recent study, 87% of recruiters reported that LinkedIn is the most effective tool when vetting during the job search process. Now, given that it's being used so much to find talent, you want to make sure that you're utilizing it to its fullest potential by writing a compelling profile, asking for strategic and substantive recommendations, and posting professional updates. This slide breaks down some of the best practices for networking into key do's and don'ts. Unfortunately, many people tend to be uncomfortable with the idea of networking. I know I do. Either because they don't know how to go about it, or maybe they just don't like to ask for help. It's important to keep in mind that most people are willing to help if it is that you're able to articulate exactly what you need and approach networking as a reciprocal process. So just getting the word out there that you're looking for work is more than half the battle. We also have an hour-long webinar on our website for anyone who would like more information about networking, and I believe Maite can share in the chat. As important as networking, LinkedIn, and your overall online presence for job searching is, they are still not going to be able to replace the time-tested tools for job hunting, starting with a resume. I'm likely not telling you something that you don't already know, but let's review some tips on how to write them. An effective resume is one that's written with a particular audience in mind. It's professional, easy to read, and has impact. It summarizes your accomplishments succinctly rather than being an exhaustive list of everything that you've done work-wise. Rule of thumb is 1 page for early career professionals and 2 pages for someone that's a little more seasoned. Lastly, a compelling resume must be future-focused and targeted toward your career goal. More and more companies are using software called application tracking systems, or ATS, to scan resumes that are being submitted. They do this to be able to weed out those who are not immediately considered qualified based on their resume, but while this is useful for them, it can be an obstacle to get through when applying for a job. So it's a good idea to go through the job description and identify any keywords you can include in your resume that might be able to get picked up by this ATS software. We also offer keyword sample guide on our website to help you draft an effective resume, which is linked on this slide. And I cannot say this enough. Putting this type of effort in really does help increase your chances of having your resume read by a real human being. So it is definitely worth the time and energy to do this. In addition to the resume, the cover letter or cover email is vitally important to the hiring process. Along with your resume, it helps get your foot in the door. And what's key to know about a cover letter is that it should be tailored to the specific job that you're applying for. It's also important to make sure that the cover letter isn't simply a regurgitation of your resume. Rather, it's an opportunity to draw parallels and/or highlight an experience that makes you uniquely suited for the role. You also want to make connections between your specific skill set and experiences to the specific job and company offering the position. And finally, and I cannot stress this enough, it is extremely important that your cover letters are carefully proofread before they are sent. When applying for many jobs, it can be tempting to copy and paste a company name and roll into some generic letter, but remember, if you accidentally leave a different company name on there, it's gonna look sloppy and can certainly negate any claims you made in that letter about being organized and detail-oriented. In thinking about how to prepare for interviews, remember that what's most important to a prospective employer is how that applicant can solve their problems and meet the needs of their company and their role. So be prepared to speak about that. Tell stories about how you've solved problems or in prior jobs and use specific examples. Also, don't be afraid to make the exchange conversational. One of the things that hiring managers are looking for is assessing if you're a personal fit. So don't be shy from that back and forth exchange. If a reviewer asks you a question that you're not quite sure how to answer, don't be afraid of asking clarifying questions to ensure that your response is in line with the answer that they're looking for. Now, we are often asked advice on how to address gaps in the resume, and when asked about a resume gap, putting a positive spin on the situation can really help put the recruiter or interviewer at ease and confirm that the gap doesn't have anything to do with something negative in terms of your work ethic or laziness. Since it is possible and totally reasonable that you will be asked about a gap on your resume, it's a good idea to come prepared with answers. If it comes up, be future focused, non-specific, and brief. This slide has a couple of useful swivel examples that might be used in an interview situation. And again, spend some time figuring out the language that feels right and comfortable for you. If someone says something like, I see you have a gap on your resume, can you tell me a little more about that? Of course, we want the answer to acknowledge the question and then swivel the interview's attention back to the job in question, the desire to get hired, and the skill set that's being put on the table. Questions about resume gaps are not necessarily the only topics that may cause stress or anxiety during an interview. Here are a few additional examples of how to use the swivel that can help decrease the chance of any accidental disclosure. Obviously, these are very specific examples that I've been putting up, but keep in mind that one of the best things that you can do for an interview is practice, practice, practice. We often feel people rolling their eyes when we recommend role playing to prepare for interviews, but it can be incredibly helpful to have a trusted one or a loved one pose some questions that you might foresee causing some trouble in an interview. That way, your response can be practiced ahead of time and out loud. Because actually speaking the words is a great way to feel more comfortable and confident when it's time to get into that interview. Now, one of the upsides of living in the technology age that we're in is that you can Google everyone and you can use Google to research a prospective employer, and you should be doing so. Try to find out as much information as possible about the company before any meetings happen. Obviously, knowing about the company is going to help you sound informed in the interview, but it's also smart to take some time to think about the company and if it's going to be a good fit for you and your needs. But you'll still want to search for any additional information that you can find. In other words, you want to do as much fact finding beyond the conversations that are happening as part of the interview process. And clearly, the goal of any job search is to find a new role. One of the best things about starting a new job with a new employer is that it's a fresh start. And according to one of our coaches, research shows that the first 90 days of a new job are the make it or break it time for success. This is the time that you're assimilating, managing your energy, meeting new people, learning the culture, and developing relationships. Remember, there's no need to work a million hours to create a good first impression. Focus instead on creating a simple plan for the things I just mentioned. Break everything down into small pieces when it feels overwhelming. And it's also important to learn and understand what it means to be successful at a new company and to remember that every company is dysfunctional in one way or another. Basically, hiring someone is a time-consuming and expensive process. So your employer is going to want to do everything possible to support the transition into a new job, and make you successful. And that can be very helpful when thinking. It could be helpful when thinking about this and you're starting a new job, when things are feeling challenging or the good feelings are outweighing the excitement of a new opportunity. And that is what we have for today.
So thank you, Sissy, so much. We are going to jump into Q&A in just a minute. If you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A box. But just want to let you know a little bit about what we have coming up here at Cancer and Careers. So we have a couple more webinars left for the year. Next month, we start a two-part Communicating Effectively series. So it's going to be on September 10th and October 8th. You do not need to come to both of them. If you missed the first one, you can still come to the second one. If you can't come to the second one, we'd still love to see you at the first one. There's going to be different information being presented at each. And then in November, we are bringing back our Balancing Work and Caregiver session. So if you have any caregivers in your lives, please feel free to share this with them. We'd love to have them there. We also have our West Coast conference coming up on October 25th. That's an all-day conference. It's happening on Zoom. The West Coast is really the time zone that it's happening in, but you can join from anywhere in the world, and we'd love to have you there as well. And then here is some contact information. If you have any questions, Sissy's email is on here. Also, all of our social media handles are here. We'd love for you to follow along. And then this is, again, just the requirements for anybody who is requesting CEs. You're going to get an email tomorrow, no later than 5 p.m. with all of this information again. But just so you know, this is what needs to take place. And then I'm going to leave this up while we go into Q&A. You can scan this QR code for the evaluation. We're also going to be dropping a link in the chat, and it's going to also open up when you close out of the webinar itself. It'll open up in your browser. We'd love to hear back from you, whether you're requesting CEs or not, to get some feedback on tonight's webinar. But with that all out of the way, Sissy, we have some questions here. The first one is, I worked at a job for 34 years and was laid off. I have to find another job and afraid on how to let them know that every 3 months I have labs. Sometimes I may need a PET scan. How do you handle saying you need to take a long lunch or need a day off?
Well, first, you don't necessarily have to say that you're going to an appointment. You can, like I mentioned, with a reasonable accommodation, if that's something that applies to you, you can shift the times that you start. Like instead of a 9 to 5, do a 7 to 3, or you can divvy up your breaks somehow um, in order to accommodate your appointments. There are a variety of reasons. The thing is to be like get creative and see what's available for you. If you do want to disclose some information, you may seek time off based on whatever state policies that you have. For that, I would either reach out to a legal expert to see for your specific circumstances, or maybe HR. Check out the employee handbook to see what policies are available for your specific workplace. And yeah, do your fact finding and get as much information as possible and see what's possible for you.
I think for something like this too, everyone has doctor's appointments. You need to,
Yeah.
or you need to go to the dentist once a year or twice a year to get your teeth cleaned. You need to have your physical. Like, you don't have to be specific about why you need to leave early or why you need to take a late lunch. If it's something like you're still in treatment and you need to miss every Thursday the entire day or something, like that might get more complicated in terms of asking for official time off. But if it's just an appointment here and there every couple months, I think you can treat it like any other appointment, and however your workplace handles it. I know, like here at CSC, if you have a doctor's appointment, you just put it on the calendar and no one needs to know what kind of doctor you're going to or what the appointment is. So if you can be vague, I would say be vague and just pretend it's any doctor appointment that anybody who has not received a diagnosis would be going to. And then if it gets more intense or if it's more regular than that, then there's other options you can go down to. Here's a question. Nowadays, applying online with AI in the mix, how do we follow up without being a nuisance when we haven't heard back from anyone? I'm assuming this is applying for jobs.
Right. You can follow up. The worst that they can do is not answer you. And you're not it's you're not being a nuisance. Maybe if you were emailing them 5 times to follow up, that's a different situation. But if you're emailing once because you haven't heard back, it doesn't hurt to ask. It's better to know than not to know, and it can maybe show that your interest in job, or give that nudge that maybe your application was weeded out and they could possibly look at your application a little more closely.
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said too. Like you don't want to show up there in person. You don't want to be calling them every day. Like one email to follow up, I think is perfectly acceptable. I don't think really AI has anything to do with this. People are still busy. People are still getting hundreds of applications for different jobs. So, and are rarely telling people, we're so sorry, we're passing on you. So, if you want that closure or something, I think a simple email to
Yeah. And I
wherever
think,
you sent your application in a
right,
respectful, professional, non-pushy way is
exactly.
perfectly acceptable.
And this could be a complete assumption, but they could be referring to application tracking systems because they are AI. They're a form of AI where resumes are being filtered through there and maybe not actually reaching anyone at HR. So they might not be hearing back because of that, because it never actually reached the person, so no one's going to follow up. Um, so again, it doesn't hurt to follow up.
So this is going to be our last question. I'm so sorry for those that we didn't get to. If we didn't get to your question, please shoot us an email at cancerincareers@cew.org, and we'll make sure to get you an answer. But the last one I have here is people are always asking how I'm doing, and I feel awful consistently saying bad. How do I address these pleasantries?
The swivel. You can swivel that conversation back to something that you feel more comfortable in. I know that we presented it in a specific work context, but if you're getting asked questions that you don't feel comfortable with answering, either because you're constantly being asked them, or whatever the reason is, that you can acknowledge that they said something and then just steer the conversation to something else. When you do that once or twice, people are gonna get it.
Yeah, they're going to pick up on your cues that you're saying.
Exactly. That's not something I don't want to talk about, but then you're avoiding that awkward, like, I don't want to talk about this. This isn't like, I don't want to continue telling you that I don't feel well.
I think sometimes too, and this is not going to work for everyone, and it's not everyone's personality. Sometimes it might help to just lie and say, like, you know what, I'm having a good day today. And like, where are we on that report I asked
Yeah.
for? Or, whatever the question, however you want to swivel it. But sometimes, especially in a work situation where things are a little more buttoned up, it can be helpful sometimes just to, smile through it. And even if you're having the worst day, just say like, I'm okay and move on with it.
Right.
Well,
Sorry, we didn't get to more questions, but if you speak Spanish, we do have a webinars coming up in Spanish for
oh
the
my
summer,
gosh,
actually.
yes, we do. I don't know what happened to that slide, Sissy. We have a whole program of Spanish webinars. We'll put it in the email tomorrow to everybody so you get it there. Well, Sissy, this is wonderful. I am so glad that you took the time to lead us through all of this information today. Thank you all for joining us. We hope we'll see you at another webinar, either in English or in Spanish, to come and have a great night.
Thank you.